Good evening. Can you hear me there?
Can you hear us now, Mr. Siebel?
I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, yeah, you're coming through loud and clear. Thank you. We'll be back up in just a minute.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Mr. Siebel, are you still able to hear us?
I am, thanks. Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
Evening.
Hello. I think we're good. Let me check my thing because I don't trust that clock. All right. I know that clock says it's 5:03 and it's wrong. That's why I don't trust it. All right. Okay, so it's 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 5:59. And we're here doing the training on public meetings and public records for the commission. So with me are all of the commissioners, Commissioner Siegel's online. And so I'm going to go through, I know most of this for you guys is a repetition of what we did during orientation. But we have to do this as part of the settlement that we agreed to for one of our litigation cases. So we're just going to go back over it again. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask any questions. Again, I think it'll be repeat, but so just to go through the materials you have, again, this is the orientation handbook that comes out or came out. The last time it was done was in 2018 by the governor's office. So that's an old one. You got that in your orientation packet when you first became a commissioner. Hopefully you have that one.
It's in the middle of this one.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So it's attached. They got wrongly attached. And that one only has a brief section in it that's on the right to participate and the right to know in the public service section. So again, this is more just reference material for you guys to have. And then the more updated version, this you didn't have in your orientation packet when you became a member because it just came out recently. And as you can see, it's still actually kind of in draft form a little bit, but this is from the Department of Labor and Industry. And this is the handbook that they give to all, they have, I can't remember how many boards they have, like 30 or 40 boards that they have that are outfitters, beauticians, dentists, all of that. All of those boards are under Department of Labor and Industry. So this was written by their chief legal counsel in consultation with the lieutenant governor, I believe. And so this is what they give to their board members. So I wanted you to have it. Again, a lot of it has nothing to do with, it's a lot of stuff you already know, Robert's rules, things like that. But there's a section that starts on page 34, that is on public participation, and then 35 is public records. And so there's just some discussion there. The right to know versus right to privacy is on 37. So there's just some additional material here. Goes kind of through all the same stuff we've talked about, and then we can talk about when you can close a meeting, things like that. We'll go more into that, but there's just, again, a reference material for you that's a little more updated than the 2018 version. And then also the materials you have in front of you, part 1 is the open meetings actual laws, which again, you got in your packet for when you got your orientation, but just another copy for you to have. And then Title 2, which is ethics requirements. Again, not new information for you guys, but I wanted to make sure you had another copy and everybody here could see that you're getting copies of that again. And it looks like I actually might have doubled up on the ethics requirements. Sorry. So you have 2 copies of the ethics requirements. They're doubly important. So, and then this, let me see, this also should have yeah, so this one has the ARMs in it too. The one that's printed that says, not the big Montana Code annotated type font. So that has the applicable ARMs interpreting those ethics rules. And then you also have Then there's just another code of ethics. Okay, and then this one, which is the black one. And this one I included more sort of as some background information for you. This was a presentation I watched I don't even know if there's a date on it, because I think he does it several different times, but it was a presentation I saw probably maybe even been 10 years ago at this point, that Mike Malloy did as a continuing legal education course for lawyers. And so this is I emphasize his presentation on open meetings. And I think it's important to emphasize that because there's a few interpretation pieces that you'll see, especially at the end, that I would probably disagree with. I think a lot of people would disagree with. There isn't necessarily case law on that point. So he is stating in some of this what his opinion is. Again, put two lawyers in a room and you're going to get three opinions. So, but I wanted you to see what some of the other opinions are that are out there. And he says Malloy Law Firm on here. That's true. He also runs, I can't remember exactly the name of it, but it's something like the Montana Freedom of Information service or something to that effect so this is sort of what he does. And I've been opposite him in several lawsuits on this stuff. And so I wanted you guys to see another perspective and make sure that you had a chance to think about what he's got to say and look at, and that way you can know too, these are the kinds of interpretations of the law that folks have, and that I think the standards you're going to be held to by others. So that's why I thought it was kind of interesting to have. And then the last one is this, a delicate balance. And this is another continuing legal education course that I took. Again, I think it was maybe 2013, maybe, so it was out of the Professional Development Center, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was taught by John Moore, and these are the handwriting you'll kind of see on there. That's his. When he gave, this is the copy I had from the class. So his handwriting is on it. And it is a tour kind of not only the statutes, you'll see it has the Constitution in it, but then and the statutes, but it also is kind of organized into questions. What do we mean by demands of individual privacy, persons versus an individual? And it organizes some of the case law on the subject. Okay, here's a big, blending the issues under separate provisions of privacy and right to know. So then it has some of the big cases and sort of their holdings. Again, this is his legal work, so take it for what it's worth. It's another attorney's opinion or another professional's opinion. But this is I consider it sort of a treatise, a secondary material, a place to start when you have a question. And then it goes into more detail of the law. And then obviously, if you guys have questions, if you're getting down in this level of trying to answer your questions, this is a great place to start to look to have a little blurb on it. But then we can talk about, okay, Sarah, there's a case in here. Can you tell me what that case says? Or give me a call and we can answer any of those kind of questions that you have. But I think it's a nice resource because it's organized sort of more intuitively by what are the questions I might have and where would I find the answers to those questions. And I'll just tell you, this is often a place, I've been doing this a long time now, so I don't have to go back to it as much as I did. But when I first started, this was usually a place I would start was, okay, where are the cases that are on this point? And I'll go find those cases and read them. So I thought I just might as well just give it to you straight up. So you have both John Moore's interpretation of this stuff and Mike Malloy's interpretation, Department of Labor's interpretation. And so you've kind of got a bunch of different opinions that are above in addition to mine. So you don't have to take my word for it. So any questions about any of that or where we got it, or all good? Everybody got everything? Okay. And then just going back, let's start. Again, I know I'm repeating stuff you already know. Yeah.
Mr. Siebel didn't receive the materials.
Okay. Are you gonna send it to him?
Yeah.
Okay, so Commissioner Siebel, we're gonna make sure we send you these materials. I know you don't have them in front of you right now, but we'll make sure you get them.
Great, thank you, Sarah.
Okay. So going back to the basics, there will always be a problem in Montana because there is a right to privacy and a right to know in our Constitution, which anybody can tell are necessarily contradictory, right? So it's never going to be an easy question ever. And the way that the courts have worked through that is to say there's a balancing test that goes on at every moment that these two things come in contact. There's and they call it a constitutional balancing test. And so what we balance during, and we is the agency, the board, the lawyer that's doing the review, whoever it is who has to do this balancing test, there's a series of sort of questions that you ask as you go through that balancing test. So in an open meeting contest, for example, and you guys don't deal with this. Well, so the way you guys would deal with this is litigation strategy, right? So with one exception, which is when one public body is suing another. So if you were to want to sue FWP or FWP, if you and FWP were suing each other, then that would be a different case. But for the most part, if you're in litigation, you can close a meeting to have a conference with your lawyer because the law protects as part of the right to privacy and also as a principle of a legal principle is that you have a right to have counsel and to have that conversation be privileged. So you can close the meeting for that reason. Again, that's a balancing test there. The courts have come out and said, well, you're right. Everybody has a right to a public meeting. But on the other hand, people need good, candid legal advice. Even boards, commissions, public entities need good, solid legal advice, and that can only happen if it's in a closed setting. So we're gonna weigh those and decide that we want good, competent legal advice in an open, free setting. So we're gonna allow that to outweigh the right to know in this instance. Another place that happens that you guys won't have to deal with is like employees. It happens sometimes in school boards, for example, school board meetings. They can close if they have a performance thing that they have to talk about with an employee. They can close the public meeting because the employee has a right to privacy in the employee's file, the employee's performance. So just again, that's the example of that balancing test kind of going on of, well, in this instance, we're going to put the individual's privacy above the public's right to know. And the court comes out in different places based on the situation. But the bottom line is, does a reasonable person have a reasonable expectation of privacy in whatever it is that they're doing, or the group have a reasonable expectation of privacy in whatever it is that they're doing? And is that something that the public is willing to recognize? Right. So that's sort of the arc of how the analysis goes. And then you'll come down to a court call of which right is more important at any given point in time, is more vital. You know, a juvenile's record is always going to be more important. That privacy interest is always going to be more important than a public right to know, with very few exceptions. So there are things that are easy calls, and then there are things that are harder calls. So
Sarah,
Yeah.
so if Jane Doe writes me an email as the commissioner, does she have a right of privacy?
no, because she has written the email to a public body, to a public entity in the course and scope of their public duties, right?
So like when you write a letter to a lawyer and they respond back to you, there's a disclaimer on the bottom of it.
Yeah.
Well, shouldn't ours have a disclaimer that it's not a private conversation?
You absolutely could if you wanted to. It's one of those things where that's just the law. So somebody should, it's not our job to necessarily educate them on what the law is all the time, but it absolutely, if you wanted to, you certainly could. But part of the reason that the right to know exists is because Montana has decided that it's important for them to know what their government's doing, right? So and to encourage the participation. So it seems pretty obvious that any reasonable person who's contacting a public entity or a public employee or a public position would understand that that communication is a public communication because it's with a public body. That's, again, you get to that sort of what's reasonable, what pretty unreasonable to expect that that communication to a public officer about public business is going to be private. So, yeah, so no, Jane Doe does not have any privacy interest in that. And that becomes important when we receive information, not just the commission, but any agency. When we receive information, once we receive it, even if it was private before, if a person is sending it to us for a public purpose, it will become public. We can't protect it, even if they had kept it private before, because we are under the obligation to keep things public, absent some reason, again, some balancing test that, public safety is a balancing test that we can use.
Tipmont.
Yes, exactly. Tipmont we have expressed that in that instance, you do have a right to privacy. And the reason there is because we need that law to be followed, right? And there's plenty of instances where, Crime Stoppers lines are, that's a sort of, but again, we've published that that's a private. Now, if we were to get those communications and then make them public without the person's consent, that would be a violation of their right to privacy. Absent, again, there's always exceptions for he's going to run out and kill somebody. That one might need to become public. So there's always some sort of exceptions there. But the bottom line is that's the sort of balancing test that overlays all of this, is that constitutional understanding that there's a fundamental constitutional conflict built into what we do. And so it's always going to be somewhat circumstantial. And the reasonableness is usually the test of that. Yeah.
Just a question on the disclosure requirements, as we give our regional reports.
Yeah.
Commission meetings. What's the line there? I get a phone call from someone in Region 4 and they want to give me some feedback on an issue. Do I need to report that?
So if it's going to become, and you guys have heard me say this probably a million times at this point, if that piece of information is going to become part of the reason you vote one way or the other on an issue, then it needs to become part of the record for the rest of the commissioners to consider as well, right? So we've talked through that. If, so you get some piece of data, somebody gives you some report, somebody gives you some piece of data, somebody gives you something that's going to cause you to change, on which you're going to base a decision that you're going to make, a vote, then you need to make that information available to both the public, but also to your other commissioners, to essentially say, this is what I'm basing my decision on.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So everybody's on the up and up, that there's no questionable stuff going on. There's no backdoor dealings going on. To make sure that that's happening, I'm under the obligation to tell everybody what I'm basing my decision on, and that becomes part of the public record, right? So somebody sends you a piece of data, you think, wow, that's a really interesting report that is different than what the department's given me. And I think that's really important. And I think it's something that we should consider as a commission. You can share that with your commissioners, your fellow commissioners, either before the meeting and make it public now through our email process, it would become public, or you can share it. Probably better practice is to share it in the context of the meeting and say, here's a thing that I got that I think I'm going to base my decision on. You guys should look at it too. And then the public can see that occur, and they can say during their public comment, actually, that data is completely unscientifically sound, and here's why. And maybe that will change your mind. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there will always be a lot of information that you guys get. You don't have to make all of it part of the record. That would make our record insane. But what you do have to do is if it's rising to the level of something that's going to change your mind, then you need to tell the public what it is that's making you have this particular opinion. And that's what you guys have all started doing on the, if I'm going to make a motion or if I'm going to make a comment, I'm going to tell you where that comment's coming from if it's something other than what we've heard at the meeting today or what's in the public materials already. 99% of the time, and again, you guys, I'm sorry, you guys have heard me say this already. I'm going to say it again so everybody can hear, is if that occurs, if somebody sends you something that you think is really interesting, the best thing to do is to say to them, this is really interesting, you should make a public comment. And then that way it automatically goes to everybody and you don't have to worry about making sure that you regurgitate it appropriately on the record. It's already in the record for everybody to see long before the meeting comes. And so that's really the safest way to handle that kind of stuff, is to just say, yeah.
And just to follow up, then we oftentimes get solicited by groups who want to advocate for a position.
Yeah.
Want to have a one-on-one meeting with a commissioner, whether you're in their region or not. Best practice on that?
Yeah, and I apologize because I think you guys, some of you have had this question to me before. I'm repeating myself, but you're welcome to meet with anybody you want to at any point in time. That's certainly, and people from FWP, people from outside groups, 501c3s, whatever, free to meet with whoever you want and gather information or listen to them. Again, it's the point that changes it is if it's something that you have in those meetings, that you hear in those meetings, that's going to change your mind, or that you think might change the mind of some of the other, not change your mind, but be a basis on which you vote, right? On why you make a decision on one of the issues in front of you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Is that true of the group? Because I thought when I read the lawsuit that we had that made us get the phone and all that, I thought it was any group that we met with had to be disclosed, whether that information, if it's an organized.
You're right.
You have to.
Yep. I'm speaking to the law in general, and you guys have another layer of transparency on top of that. So my answer was based on, if we didn't have that, that would have been my answer. You're right. Absolutely. Based on the new process that we have in place, it doesn't matter. Any meeting you guys have is going to be disclosed
With a group.
with a group. Yes, right. Any meeting you have with an organized group is going to be.
For me, it added a dynamic because there's some individuals that are part of a group, and that's where it got kind of diced. So I'm just taking a more liberal approach to it and writing everybody down. But I basically have to ask, like, are you affiliated with a group? Are you speaking on behalf? And sometimes they'll be like, I'm with the group. And then you kind of talk about the group. So that's added kind of a different dynamic, because I had that happen twice this last time since our last meeting. Is I met with somebody, we didn't discuss any business related to that group, but he was the president of a group.
Yeah.
And so then
You err on the side of caution is always the best way to go, which sounds like what you're already doing, is you're just writing it down regardless. And I would say, although we have that level of transparency for the groups that we've added on, my original answer with respect to what you would base a decision on would apply to the individual conversations, right? So you meet somebody on the street, they say, hey, I heard that this thing was up in front of the commission and I want you to know XYZ. And you say, hey, XYZ sounds like a reason that I should vote for or against. That's when you best case scenario, you say to that person, put that on the record, please. Go ahead and put it in a comment on the agenda item. That way everybody can see it. It's out in the open for all the public to see, whatever. If for some reason they can't do that or they won't do that or whatever, and it still is something that you think you're going to base your decision off of, that's the point where you get to at the decision point, at the discussion point, you say, hey, I met this person on the street and they said XYZ, and that's what I'm basing my decision on. Just so the public can hear whatever XYZ was. And then during their public comment period, they can say, well, XYZ actually is not a reason why you should make that decision. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And just to follow up on the organization, all we were required to do was disclose the group.
Yeah.
Not members or any part of the discussion. They just simply want to know for
Who you met with. Yep,
Mulder, I met with the Mulder Foundation.
exactly.
That's
Yep.
it. No
Yep.
more details, person, anything else.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope, just that yeah. The point being that we're being transparent about who it is that we're meeting with on a group-wide level. I mean, to try and track all of the individual conversations that you guys have would just be completely impossible. And that's, again, you get into that reasonable scale.
Well,
And yeah.
I think in this new operating environment, it's much easier to say, I don't take public meetings. I don't meet with anyone.
yeah,
I don't do that anymore. If you
welcome
make
to do that.
Submit them.
Welcome to do that too.
Yeah.
Totally up to you. And frankly, that makes the record nice and clean. And then you don't have to worry about it being a judgment call. But the pinch point really is what's gonna, yeah,
Along those same lines, if we receive an email with data, to your point, that we think is interesting and it came to us, we're never aware if it goes to everyone else individually, if it's not sent to the whole commission. But if we turn around and forward it, give it to Eric and say, please give this to the rest of the commission, that because of our rules with email now will become public record. And that piece will be, I mean, so it's in the record and all the other commissioners have seen it. So that's another appropriate way to, especially if you get something, data or some sort of testimony via email, sure, encourage them. But if they don't do a public testimony, that's as good as having them put that in public comment, correct?
I mean, yes, I would say I'd still encourage them to put it in the public comment. I mean, the best way for them to do it would be to do through the public comment, because the ways the emails come through, it's not going to be as far in advance normally. So it's just easier if they put it in public comment. But yeah, you're absolutely right that now that data is public through that process, rather than having you guys have to say it. I mean, it still would have gotten in anyway when you say on the record that this is what you based your decision off of, since we weren't going to, we're not going to email each other and have email conversations about data off of the outside of the meeting. So as we've talked about, what you would do is say it on the record rather than have to do that. This process of putting the emails out ahead of time will be the same as saying it on the record, just even to your point, a little bit more substantive.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions there? So I think the big, I think you've gone through there when you can close a meeting. For you guys, it's very rare. It's pretty much only litigation related. A public meeting, what is a public meeting? Anytime you're going to take action on an item is a public meeting, or you're going to discuss as a group, as a quorum, you're going to discuss things that will be on an agenda item. That's a meeting, right? So it comes to that decision point. That's where the meeting comes in, and the quorum. The decision point and the quorum are sort of two key things for you to think about there. Is, a question between the two of you. Hey, in my region, I saw whatever trend. Are you seeing the same trend in your region? That's not a quorum discussion. Now, if it becomes something that you're going to base a decision off of, like we just said, we'll put it on the record, probably would be in the record anyway, because chances are high it's in FWP's materials. But the point is, a conversation between the two of you on some questions, clarifying some data, something like that, totally fine. Not a quorum, not, you're not trying to convince one or the other, you're just exchanging information, totally fine. Now, as we've been through, if you have everybody together and you're talking about stuff and it's not a public meeting, that's when we got a problem. So I think that's pretty straightforward, but yeah.
This is maybe getting a little deep, but so if you have to close a meeting for council.
Yeah.
And that what you came out of was substantive to then when you open it back up and make a decision based on what was discussed and closed, how much, I mean, I guess there's that fine line of what needs to be discussed in the public meeting.
Yeah. So again, it's a little bit, not to sound like a lawyer, but it depends. So if it's, for example, the employee's performance, then the performance discussion goes off the record. You come back and you make a decision on the record without discussing
So
why you're making that decision.
You don't have to
you can't. If there's a right to privacy, you
Right.
can't. So you would make the decision publicly, but there's no discussion about the stuff that you learned in the closed portion of the meeting. Now, it's a little different with a lawyer, because if, for example, the decision that's being made in the conversation with the lawyer is what the legal strategy is going to be, you know, okay, the lawyer is going to go and make these arguments at this time. That decision can happen within the closed confines of the conversation with the lawyer. You don't have to come back out and vote on it outside of that meeting. Does that make sense? So again, we're keeping the body of the information private, closed. And if there's no way to make, like, a vote can be public without the body of the information getting out to the public. If there's if there's not a way to make a discussion, I mean, you guys don't vote on legal stuff. It would be a decision, you know, a group decision on how you're going to go forward in litigation or what the arguments are going to be or stuff like that. So that there's no way to put that out in the public without compromising that
Right.
privilege, right?
Public's need to know is overridden.
Exactly, in that instance. So again, it kind of, where the circle is depends a little bit on what the interest is and what can be done to balance that interest against the protection.
Thank you.
Sure. And those are all times the thing you do have to do is put on the record why you're closing the meeting. So you can't just say, we're closing the meeting now and close it. You have to say, we're closing the meeting because we have to have a confidential personnel conversation. We have to have a conversation on litigation strategy with our lawyer. You know, you have to make a record for everybody of what it is, so they know what you're going in the back room to talk about.
So once in a while I get a call from maybe like a person from my group asking me more of how I'm gonna run the meeting, if it's still gonna be the 2-minute time limit, you know, are you gonna put this and this together, just kind of preparing for how they're gonna comment? Is that something that I need to disclose?
No, that's procedural.
Okay.
So if it's really the substance of the decision stuff that's going to be, and that's all of those procedural things are going to be public anyway during the meeting, right? So the purpose of this is that we want to make sure the stuff that needs to be public gets public. All of that will become public anyway when you start out the meeting and you have an agenda and you say you're going to get 5 minutes. So it's coming out. Yeah, it's just the spirit of the law here, as you can tell, is that light of day what we're making our decisions on, and then most importantly, giving the public a chance to comment on that stuff that we're basing the decisions on, because the public may have a valid point of why you shouldn't consider that, or, you know, or may have a counterpoint. So that's why it's important to put everything out there, is to transparency and also the opportunity to contradict. And the way the system's set up, that happens live. So, you know, you may have one piece of information and then you may get a different piece of information, and then you got to try and sort through it all at the same time. And that's just sort of the nature of the public meeting. But the point is for the public to see that process unfold, that, you know, to see your decision-making process occur in public. Yeah.
So this has come up a couple of different times where one member or another doesn't have the information or the background on a particular issue. You know,
Yeah.
just 'cause it's not in their region, or they don't have a history with that particular species or something like that. So call another commissioner and try to get the perspective of, okay, what's the framework, and, you know, kind of what's the history lesson on this thing.
Yeah.
You know, without that context, because the materials don't give that to you.
Yeah.
Without that context, it's almost inconceivable that a commissioner can make an informed decision without knowing the history, background, and everything else, and what might be the issues. Is there anything precluding one commissioner assisting another and understand that background?
As long as there's, you know, yeah, if it's an information exchange, that's totally fine. You're not, you know, there's no trying to convince one way or the other. It's just a straight up information exchange. Even better if all of that information is already public. I mean, like what you just described, the history of this with the commission, that's all been out in the public, that, you know, like what the commission has done over the course of the last 30 years on a particular species is all public information. You're just going to be able to synthesize it quickly in a conversation.
Right.
So that's perfectly fine. Again, if there's something in that conversation that for some reason changes your mind, or that's something that's gonna, you know, let's say you get to the meeting and you say, you know, I learned about the history of this, and because of the history of this, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. That's the moment where you would put it on the record that this is what I'm basing my decision off of, for everybody else to hear, in case they say, well, actually, that's not the history. Let me tell you a different history. Do you see what I mean? So the point is,
But let's
yeah.
take that example and flesh it through. Let's just say somebody at a meeting says, you know, I was thinking one way once I understood the background, and nobody tried to convince me otherwise, but it shed a different light, and therefore I'm voting this way, and they make that comment. Then does that turn what was an okay conversation between two members now not okay because
No.
they made that declaration?
No, it's fine. Again, is the point is the public's hearing what it was that you talked about. And out of that conversation came a decision point, came an opinion. And so we just need to make that public, so they can hear, you know, okay, I had a conversation about the history. When I learned about the history, this is what I learned. And because of that, I've decided X, Y, or Z. Then that gives the public an opportunity to come in and say, whoa, 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 that's not the history. Or one of the fellow commissioners to come in and say, whoa, 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 that's not the history. And then that conversation can happen publicly. But if it's just an exchange of information that, you know, and 99% of what you guys get is public information anyway, right? I mean, the count of an animal, the history of the animal in the Montana, that kind of stuff is all public information. So it's not, and a lot of what you're basing your decisions off of is stuff that anybody else could ask FWP for and get the same copy, right? Or they could go look through the minutes of the past meetings and that's all going to be there, you know. So, but it's just good practice to say, if I'm basing my decision on anything that isn't already in the record, I'm going to make sure and put it in the record so everybody has the opportunity to debate about it if they want to. Change your mind. Say, no, that's in fact a bad fact. Whatever. So that sort of goes to the public meeting piece. What is a public meeting? I think for you guys, I think we've been down this road enough that I think you guys are got a pretty good handle on it. Yeah.
A little different direction, clarification on the cell phone requirement. The cell phone is only required for commissioner to commissioner and commissioner to staff, department staff, right? Because I'm getting, like, there's too many people, especially in Region 2, that have my cell phone number and they call me on my personal cell phone. So I'm doing a lot of the groups that I'll disclose public, they're calling my personal cell phone. So I'm not doing, like, probably 90% of my correspondence, especially with public via text and phone calls, is through my personal phone. I have done all of my calls other than initially my phone number was posted as my personal cell. So there was even still some staff that didn't know that. So I'm changing that over.
Yeah. And we knew there was going to be a bit of a transition period while we had to move that through. So the settlement now is that all business is done through your public email and your public phone. So, but everybody understands that that's going to take a minute for everybody to understand that the phone number, the old phone numbers are no good anymore for the business piece of it. Now we need to use the new phones for the business. But
so it's all been, because I thought it was just commissioner to staff.
nope, all
Really?
all business.
Pretty tough when the phones don't work.
I know.
What?
That's
I know. That's what I mean. I know there's a transitional period where everybody's we got to get the phones working. We got to get the phone numbers out there. We're again, back to reasonable here. We're doing our reasonable level best. But yes, we need to move to all business on the public phones.
But like the Gmail, you can get that on your phone. They still can sweep it But you can still do Gmail on your phone, your personal,
on the work
Then they
phone.
can sweep
Right.
all your personal information.
but only Gmail, right?
No, we're not doing any business on our personal phones
Okay.
anymore.
But we don't have Gmail on the new phones.
Okay, well, that's, again,
Okay,
that's,
That's
Alright.
why you're turning them in.
okay.
yeah, we're trying to fix that. We're trying to get that fixed.
So I guess my question, so we can't even pull up our Gmail account on our personal phone?
No, we're doing all business on the personal phones now. We're starting to get a little bit into the conversation that is the lawyer conversation as opposed to the training conversation. So I want to be a little bit careful there. But yes, as you guys I know we have a lot of logistics that we're trying to work through this, and it's not working right now. So we're going to get to everything happening on the business email and the business phone once everything gets
Okay.
worked out.
That's
Which-
almost impossible for me, like nearly.
We're gonna get there. Get there. I know right now it's and we've understood, we've had this conversation that I know that means that you guys can't carry two phones with you all the time. And we've talked through with the chair, like, okay, that means that I'm only gonna be able to look at my work phone or commission phone once every week or once every 2 days or once every whatever. And that's okay. If that's how life goes, that's, you guys are volunteers. You have to do it within your life scope. So that's again, that's the understanding, is that that's okay. But that's where we're getting, once we get all the logistics worked out, is we're getting to, and the idea being, again, that I mean, you've seen me do it 100 times where I have my right to privacy and my other phone is my right to know. And so you can hand over rather than having you guys have to drag your text the way we've been doing it, you're gonna just be able to hand over your phone and we can do it for you. And then you're not out your personal phone while that happens. Because as you know, we've had a lot of times where you've had to turn over your text messages and you had to turn over your emails and all of that stuff. So this is just gonna make that process a lot easier. But I get it that logistically that we have a ways to go before that works out.
And it's just sent texts, not received texts. that you're
Yes,
sweeping.
right, yeah. And sent emails too.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
because again, I know you guys get inundated with stuff. So the point is not what you get inundated with. The point is what it is that you are doing, because
It would seem that calls would be the same way. I mean, if you get an incoming call that you didn't solicit, I understand if it's from another commissioner,
yeah,
but out of the blue, you get a call from somebody and, they tell you what's on their mind and then they hang up. I mean,
yeah.
they're halfway through their comment before, look, I can't do this. You got to call.
Stop
this
it.
number."
Right, yes. Again, reasonable. We're
Yeah,
going to but as you know, we've talked about this, is to try and, especially as we're going through the transition, push them back and say, hey, I got a work number, call me on my work number
Yep.
now. I mean, that's going to take a training minute for the folks who have your personal phone and have always had your personal phone to get used to that, but it's okay. We'll get there.
Hey,
One
hey, Sarah,
suggestion I'd have,
Yeah.
Oh, hey, that begs the question. I mean, I'm sitting here on my laptop. That's my laptop because it's my best computer to do Zoom meetings on. So is that?
I mean, again, reasonable.
Right.
You're not doing business on your computer. You're just watching the thing on your computer. If you start downloading files on your computer, then we've got a
Well-
problem. That's working.
Well, yeah,
mean, on
okay, so those of us that don't get a mailed binder, that use the virtual binder, which is through browser, and I have big screens in my office to see them because I can't see them on my little tablet.
Yeah.
You're telling me
Yeah.
that's a problem.
No. I mean, just attach the screen, like using a big screen versus a small screen is fine. If
Well,
you
but
start
I'm-
downloading files on your computer to do anything other than look at them on a big screen, that's when we've got a problem. Right. So you're writing emails on your personal email. That's what we were trying to avoid here,
Got it.
is
Okay.
you're writing your,
But I guess
Yeah.
that's where I'm looking at the Gmail. If I'm doing strictly business stuff on my commission email,
yeah.
it shouldn't matter what device I do it on.
Right.
Yeah, we'd prefer to get it on so it's all on one thing. But I get it that for now we have to do that because that's the easiest way to manage it. But hopefully we can transition to, you just get used to having
2 phones.
2 phones.
But isn't
back to the
Gmail
email.
accessible regardless of device? I
Yeah.
mean, it's-
Right.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
As long as you're working on your Gmail, you're fine. But I would prefer if you had the 2 phones. That way
no,
it's
that's
just
fine.
clear that even though you're doing work using your work email, you're also it's just clear that you're using your work device, and we don't have to go down the road of, okay, now we're going to dump your whole phone to show that in fact you are only doing your work
Sure.
on your Gmail. Do you see what I mean? So it's just a cleaner way to show that in fact you are doing what you're supposed to be doing without having to drag your whole personal phone to prove that you are in fact doing what you're supposed to be doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. One suggestion I've had, so I was probably not as severe as Jeff because of his role, but I was getting a lot of calls and emails. So I reached out to a couple of the NGOs and said, here's the new contact. Could you please
Tell your people.
put it in a newsletter or whatever,
Yeah.
ease up on it, because it's really hard to keep having to tell people I can't talk to you on this phone, or I can't do this, I can't do that. So I know some of the groups have done that, but maybe if FWP spearheads it for all the groups.
I know we're trying to do the same thing. It's whenever somebody calls us is to say, yeah, we're doing the same thing. It's called the commissioner. Nope, that's not the commissioner's number. This is the commissioner's number. Same thing posted on the website. So again, I know there's a transition period here, but that's the goal. The goal is that we don't anymore have to worry about, okay, no, I really am only using my work email, but I'm just doing it on a different device. It's just here, look at my device. You can see everything I do is on this thing. Take it. You can look at it and see that. That's where we're going. And I know it's painful right now, but it will get better. Okay, so back to the
What's even more painful is the transition from an iPhone.
I know, I already heard
Like,
that.
it's so brutal.
Second.
If you've used an iPhone, it is not intuitive to.
You
switch
know,
over.
you shouldn't use an iPhone in the first place, is all I have to say about that.
Maybe not, but-
Yeah.
Here
Yes.
goes the battle.
I know, that was, there was.
Not fall under good legal.
Like, I couldn't even answer the damn. I was
Sure.
pushing on the button. That's
That's like
how you
hitting it,
answer.
hitting it.
All the phones, how do you answer?
You
figured
I had
out-
the same problem.
Oh,
I
really?
had the same
Yeah,
problem.
because
It's
I'm
like
mad.
trying
I
to,
missed the first 12 calls on that phone.
Yeah.
And my wife's just like, well, you just swipe it. And I'm like, oh my God. Cause I was tapping it. I'm like, this damn thing, because an iPhone, you just tap it and it answers. And that thing, tapping and clicking buttons and hanging up on people is outrageous for the first couple weeks.
You do have a first world problem right there.
That is a first.
People wonder why don't you ever answer the phone? It's like, because I can't answer it.
All right, are we done conversing
Yep,
about the phone
okay.
now? Can we get back to the training?
We'd like to whine just another half an hour.
The point is, we're doing this because we're trying to be transparent with the public about what it is that the work that you guys are doing, so that everybody knows what the work is that you're doing. And I know that you're already doing it the way you should. This is just another layer of transparency, of an ability, an easy ability for us to show folks. So you guys already know, as I can hear you say, I'm using my work email. That's the message you've heard from me all along. That's where we get to the public records piece of this, is what is a public record? A public record is essentially any business that we public employees do, you consider as a public record, until there's some privacy interest that comes into play there, right? Privilege, again, there's some personal thing, okay, I'm emailing Eric to say that I've had some medical issue and therefore I'm not going to be at the commission meeting. That you've got a privacy interest in your medical information, we're not going to get that up. So absent those sort of clearly private things, operate under the assumption that everything you do is public. And now, as you can see, we're posting all the emails before every meeting, so everybody knows what you're doing anyway. Whether or not we were doing that would, as you guys know, we've turned them over plenty of times before with public records requests. So Now it's even easier, so you guys don't have to dig through your email. We can just pull your sent box and call it good. So that includes not just emails. I know that's the number one way that we communicate, but if you are out there handwriting letters, that is also covers those. You know, if you're text messages, we've talked about that a lot. Those are public records. Sometimes notes you keep would be if they were like, let's say during a commission meeting, you're taking notes on what the public says. Probably not necessary because everybody was there hearing the public say whatever it was the public was saying. But if for some reason you've got notes of a conversation that you had with somebody who's going to that changed your mind, you know, you say on the record, hey, this conversation changed my mind. You had notes from that. Somebody could send us a request and say, hey, I want the notes of that conversation. It's done in the course of your business. So they're going to get those notes because that's a record that you kept of the business that you were doing in your public capacity. Does that make sense? So records goes to all of the things. Obviously, all of the materials you guys know are public anyway. And the information you would receive, I mean, again, I know you guys get these blasts with information. All of that information is public. If, you know, one organization were to ask for in a public records request, we want every communication that you've had with this other organization, that organization is going to get all of the blast emails that you've received from this organization, even though you guys haven't sent it as part of a public records request, they're going to get everything. So we don't post that stuff on the website because again, it would just be absurd, the amount that would come, but just know that sort of discernment can happen. And we're doing that on the back end of your email. So you don't have to worry about that now. IT can pull that stuff with their searches. So, but if you know, if somebody asks for those specific kinds of information, they're going to get everything, not just what you send. So again, I think you guys know all that already, but the other public, you know, what are public records? Obviously, most of what the FWP data and some that would go to, you know, maybe you guys call FWP and say, hey, I need this report that wasn't in the materials that I got. If that report is probably 99% of what FWP does is already on FWP's website anyway. So if it's something that's already public, that would be, it's on the website anyway. If you were to, again, this is why it's important to say it on the record. If you were to get on the record and say, hey, I got this document from FWP that really changed my mind, and that's what I'm basing my decision off of, somebody can then come and make a public records request for that document and we hand it over at that point. If it's for some reason it's not already on the website. So that's public records are essentially what you're doing with your time, the documents that you're using or creating in the course of your business as a commissioner. Any other questions there? I always say, as you've seen, you write emails as though they will be read out loud in a deposition. It's a line that you guys have heard me say a lot.
Kind of a weird tangent, but I just thought we were talking about recording devices and recording.
Mhm.
And Zoom now has the ability, like you can record Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
Does somebody have to tell you if they're recording the Zoom meeting?
Zoom will tell you.
It says it right at the top of the screen.
Yeah, so Zoom, you'll always know at the beginning of the meeting, they'll say this meeting is being recorded. And then it'll show on the thing that it is being recorded.
There's a big red, I see big red recording sign up on the upper left.
But they could take their phone and record it also. I mean, it's not like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's again, it's a bit of a question. If you have a reasonable expectation that whatever conversation you're having is going to be private for some reason and somebody records it without telling you, that's a problem. Again, if you're operating in the scope of your public duties, you're doing your public job, assume that it's public. And if somebody were, let's say you were to have a Zoom call with an organization, you disclosed during your disclosures at the meeting that you had that and it was important to you, somebody then puts a public records request in and says, hey, he said there was this meeting and that there was a recording of it. I want that. And we would hand it over. Does that make sense? Assuming we have it. I mean, if it's something that's kept by the organization, we have no control over what the organization gives out or doesn't give out. This is only applies to what the public entity has, right? So if we don't have it, if it's only the organization that has it, we just send it to them and say, it's up to the organization whether or not they want to produce it. We didn't keep it. It's not part of our records.
So if you brought that up at the meeting, let's say
Mhm.
that I got this public record.
Mhm.
And yet you made your decision based on that, and that it's the commission makes it their decision. It doesn't necessarily mean that the public had the right to see that before the decision was made.
If the public was, so, the public's on notice that you're going to talk about this stuff. And if the information is all public anyway, the public can go and get
They had
the
the right,
information
that's
ahead
the
of time
information.
if they wanted to. I mean, again, we're not gonna, like, all information that is out there in the world that you could possibly base your decision off of is not something that we should reasonably put in a
Right,
record.
right.
So, if the public has the ability to come and ask the same questions of FWP, for example, that you're asking of FWP, and we'll hand over the same documents. The important, again, that's the important filter of putting on the record for the public what that was so that they can go get the same document and know that that was a thing that you did,
Even though it was after the fact.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, because again, it's the transparency piece.
sure.
And if you're putting it on the record at the time, okay, maybe that piece of data, the report, whatever it is that you're looking at, isn't in front of the public at that point, but you're saying what it is that you're gleaning out of this that has made your decision, right? I mean, again, it's no different than, well, I was thinking about this, and when I was thinking about this, a question came into my head, and now I'm asking the question. So it's a discussion topic right
Sure.
there. So as long as we're telling the public what it is that we're basing our decisions off of, that's what's important, so that they can understand. And the idea there again is the backdoor dealings, right? I'm not making my decision because I met with the coal, the coal company who's whatever is going to pay me $1 million to make this decision. I'm going to tell the public what it is, the reason that I'm making the decision that I'm making.
Sure.
So there's no backdoor dealings.
I think there's still pretty material confusion about the process of the decision-making at a meeting and the whole motion thing, because I noticed some of the larger NGOs that all submitted their comments relatively late in the game, almost to the group, said you aren't leaving us sufficient enough time to analyze this, and this is after I think the commissioners did a phenomenal job of putting forth all their amendments up front with it. I know in my case, I try to get them there as early as it possibly can after, we get our materials so that the public has a chance to absorb it. I guess there's still this just lack of understanding out there that we didn't have to do that. We could do everything just right at the
Yep.
meeting.
And we still can.
You
Yeah.
still can. Yep.
But
No, this is a courtesy essentially it's an additional transparency that we're trying to give to the public.
So it might be helpful to mention that tomorrow's meeting is because it frustrates me. I think this commission is bending over backwards to try to be as transparent as possible and give everybody the opportunity to participate. So when you see those comments, it's just like, really, after all we've been going through to do this. So.
Yeah. And that goes to the public notice of the meetings. And you guys have heard me talk about that a lot before. The bottom line is that the agenda, what you're going to be deciding, is the thing that has to get out to the public ahead of time so that they know what your decision points are going to be at the meeting. That's the bottom line of the law, is the public needs to be on notice of the things that you're going to be deciding. The idea there being that they then can have the opportunity to bring whatever it is that they want to the meeting and change your mind, have the discussion, whatever it is. So the pre stuff that we do, the thing that we have to do is let them know what decisions are going to be made at this meeting. All of the other stuff we do is extra and I think fantastic. But the law is clear that what has to happen is that the public has to know what's happening at the meeting. The idea being that, you know, your county commission is not going to all of a sudden surprise everybody. Yeah, we're having a meeting, but we're not going to tell you what it's about. And then all of a sudden we're going to make a decision on this subdivision that's of high public interest and nobody knew that's the thing that we were going to decide at the meeting that day. So they didn't know that they should come if that was the thing they cared about. So, yeah. And we are at 6:59. So unless anybody has any other questions, I think we've been through this a bit ad nauseum and you guys have a lot of paper from me. So if you have any other questions, happy to hear it. Probably also in your material. I have a binder of all the cases if you'd like to come read them all at some point.
Maybe I'll take that with me tonight.
I'm happy to give it. I will have Eric run off a copy for you.
Yeah.
All right.
Burn the copier up.
Well, and I think IT's left us to our own devices, so I don't know how we turn this off.
I just
I
said
never
we-
did text anybody.
At all.
I did text Eric, said, please turn the cooking off.